The course of the United States history has been notorious for the development of commercialism and consumer culture. The current international affairs of the United States consist largely of businesses with one objective: power. And, in the commercial world as we know it, money is power. Among others, there always has been a common demand for healthcare. So, in the past few centuries, the pharmaceutical industry has emerged as a powerful force within this society. It can be assumed that the success of an industry be ensured when individual lives literally depend on its commodities. Currently, the issue regarding drug pricing has inspired extensive research into this topic. Ethically speaking, the current pharmaceutical industry is not effective in its societal role because although it provides drugs that save lives, monopolistic tendencies and the sole drive for wealth maintain a typical business climate within the industry. However, healthcare and the lives of individuals should not be impacted so directly by these forces. The pharmaceutical industry can be dated back to the Middle Ages, with the presence of apothecaries and pharmacies reliant upon naturopathic treatments. The 17th century scientific revolution then brought forward methods of experimentation and rationalism. The Industrial Revolution then shifted the production of goods to mass production and initiated an emergence of consumer culture. The first pharmaceutical company, Pfizer, was founded in the United States in 1849. The basis of the business was initially in chemicals and thrived due to the Civil War, creating a market for antiseptics and painkillers. Eli Lilly presented the emerging industry with a new focus on manufacturing as well as research and development. Meanwhile, German pharmaceutical companies such as Merck were also expanding. United States companies took advantage as the German lead was disrupted during World War I. World War I marked the beginning of globalization of the pharmaceutical industry. As new drug developments occurred, the concerns of these unregulated drugs did as well. These concerns prompted the creation of the 1902 Biologics Control Act, which authorized the U.S. Hygienic Laboratory to license manufacturers, followed by the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906, which stated that it shall be unlawful for any person to manufacture within the territory or the District of Columbia any article of food or drug which is adulterated or misbranded. World War II sparked a wave of governmental support for this industry as it began to sponsor programs. For example, penicillin was developed by 11 U.S. pharmaceutical companies under the War Productions Board. This governmental support continued after World War II and can be directly attributed to the power held by the pharmaceutical industry today. The thalidomide scandal of 1961 consisted of the drug thalidomide being marketed to patients worldwide by the pharmaceutical industry in the 60s. Being largely untested and off-brand, the drug resulted in widespread birth defects, largely in Germany where the drug initiated. Although pressured by the United States pharmaceutical industry, President John F. Kennedy, and FDA advisors, FDA Inspector Francis Kelsey refused to allow the drug's approval in the United States, as supporting evidence of its validity and reliability were insufficient. This is an early example of unethical sentiments enforced by the pharmaceutical industry and aided by government that could have had catastrophic results on public health. The current pharmaceutical industry in the United States violates its ethical role as public healthcare provider. The ethical principles in question predominantly surround the fact that public health and, in turn, security and accessibility to necessary drugs must be prioritized. Currently, wealth is being prioritized. Big Pharma violates its ethical role as public provider of healthcare by producing and marketing dangerously addictive drugs, with the sole drive being profits made from addiction to these substances. This is exemplified by a lawsuit by the state of Oklahoma holding pharmaceutical companies partially responsible for the opioid crisis. Both Purdue Pharma and Teva Pharmaceuticals have already settled, agreeing to pay millions of dollars, assuming the partial responsibility for the crisis itself. Brad Beckworth, representative of the Oklahoma Attorney General's office, identified the illegal and unethical flaws to be oversupply and inaccurately positive advertisements. This is an example of how the pharmaceutical industry is violating its ethical role in society. Another example is the abundance of prescribed medication with little proven validity. Gabapentin exhibits this issue, given that it's been FDA approved for 20 years and it's prescribed to millions in the United States for numerous issues ranging from pain and seizures to hot flashes and more, depending on what the doctor deems the substance fit to treat. However, there's little to no evidence that this drug is actually effective for any of the things it's prescribed for. Therefore, the gabapentinoids are symbolic of three currently challenging problems in the practice of medicine: a deadly national epidemic of opioid addiction prompting doctors to seek alternative drugs for pain, the limited training in pain management received by most doctors, and the influence of aggressive and sometimes illegal promotion of prescription drugs, including through direct-to-consumer advertising. $31 billion is spent annually on the public on prescription drugs, over-the-counter remedies, and other drug therapies. It is understood that the booming global pharmaceutical industry, $100 billion, is spent per year on research and development. Therefore, drugs are expected to be expensive to maintain this business model. However, Gag clauses and excise use of undue market power by large pharmacy benefit managers require doctors to only offer more expensive options when an insurance company is involved, the excise money often being directly received by the pharmacy benefit managers. However, individuals do not directly lose money. This practice is unethical in itself because it accumulates money that did not need to be spent in the first place into the pockets of the middlemen within the pharmaceutical industry, aided by the law and unbeknownst to the individual whose care is at hand and should be the primary focus. Meanwhile, while excess money is being spent on drugs, drug prices continue to rise at alarming rates. According to the NCSL Research Center website, hepatitis C is the leading infectious disease in the United States in terms of death count. Sovaldi is one of the first hep C drugs to be produced, pricing at an alarming $84,000. It is understood that 75% of increased Medicaid spending on prescription drugs is due to increased prices, while only 25% of the increased spending can be attributed to higher use. The Affordable Care Act, enacted with the intent of immediate improvements on the healthcare coverage for all Americans, along with the Healthcare and Education Reconciliation Act of 2010, which encompassed coverage, Medicare, Medicaid, and revenues, both increased pharmaceutical profits due to increased access to prescription drugs, and yet the costs continue to rise. Meanwhile, research and development has slowed, which the National Institute of Health attributes to budget cuts, inflationary losses, and increased development costs. The cycle exhibited reflects the relation between big business and government during the Gilded Age, in which case mass amounts of money were compiled within a booming business with hypocritical results and little notice for public interest, an example of this being the railroad industry at the time. This issue was combated by the federal government, first by the Sherman Antitrust Act, which set precedent for the more effective Clayton Antitrust Act, by stating that every person who shall monopolize or attempt to monopolize or combine or conspire with any other person or persons to monopolize any part of trade or commerce among several states or with foreign nations shall be deemed guilty of felony. The monopolistic era of big business during the Gilded Age surrounded industrial commodities and still had negative effects on the public. And now parallels could be drawn to an industry whose products hold unprecedented power over the public through health. The process of relaying drugs to user is complex, but it is proven that the majority of the business is concentrated in only a few large companies, holding most of the market share. The United States government also allows rebates, price negotiations, and discounts, all of which are kept confidential. Meanwhile, the Pharma Guiding Principles direct-to-consumer advertisement about prescription medicines handbook states the requirement by the FDA that pharmaceutical companies be accurate, truthful, and not misleading. On the other hand, the reality is hypocritical of this, and completely unethical in practice, as it is abundantly clear that within an industry built on public health care, there is little care for public health at all. Currently, many individuals are calling adamantly for increased FDA involvement in the sales process of drugs. The House under the Trump administration recently passed a bill that deducts $100 million from navigator groups with the purpose of increasing online accessibility to the Affordable Care Act's resources and offering insurance plans with the intent to undercut Obamacare in the partisan stance on the bipartisan drive for drug price reduction. The main goals among the federal government surround cutting drug prices. However, the people with potential influence over this issue aren't regarding the source, being the ethical flaws within the structure of the United States pharmaceutical industry. These issues are not being addressed adequately by the federal government, as Big Pharma continues to receive secretive support in its processes in the forms of gag clauses, tax cuts, rebates, and more. There is worry within the future of this industry, because history has shown that too much power condensed within an industry can lead to instability and conflict, and therefore we must go to all lengths to prevent this. Change needs to happen at a federal level, in the form of increased accountability required by the industry, accompanied by transparency and a formal code of ethics to be enforced by the FDA, to ensure that drugs are being created, marketed, and sold in an ethical fashion that they deserve, providing the public with stable access to valid and reliable products when necessary. Individuals can push for this change by being educated on the topic and aware of the underlying requirements of doctors regarding the drugs they are prescribed, and aware of the potential marketing influence on individual drug choice. We can also lobby our representatives, exercising our First Amendment rights and expressing our care for the reform within this industry, for we as constituents hold far more power over our representatives and senators than one may believe. Education, realization, and perseverance will result in positive change made to a powerful industry, which has the potential to be setting an ethical role in the global market as a healthcare provider to the public.